Not that you can really spoil anything on the first page. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Just Another Struggling Writer, the beleaguered author's one-stop shop for commiseration and hopefully inspiration. My name is Carrie Scher, and I am just another struggling writer, and today we have a guest. And today I'm going to be doing a side-by-side comparison of the first 250 words or so, or about the first page of my manuscript between the first and second draft. As a reminder, if you're new here, my name is Carrie, and I am an aspiring author working on what I hope to be my debut fantasy novel, Seekers of Empyrean. Seekers of Empyrean is a Monster of the Week inspired urban fantasy about a young woman with a rare magical ability who is recruited by a secret government agency to hunt down and stop a growing threat to the magical community. And I just thought this would be a fun video to show what I ended up keeping from draft one and what I decided to rework, and show off a little bit of my particular writing style. Now, this is not a completely representative example of my draft one to draft two changes, because I ended up keeping the vast majority of the words that I wrote in this particular section, but also most of the first chapter I kept and just reworked a little bit. But I have been keeping track of what words I've been pulling over from the first draft, and so far it's only about 25%. So this is, again, not a completely accurate representation of how much I am pulling over from draft one. When I sat down to start draft two, I really struggled because I kind of liked the opening that I had come up with. I think the first line is effective, and it is a pretty good representation of my personal voice. I don't think it's a great representation of the main character's voice, which you'll see here in a minute. There is some disconnect there, which I don't know, may or may not get resolved. But overall, I really do like these couple of opening paragraphs. At a time where I was worried that I wouldn't be able to launch draft two successfully, I needed that to kind of get myself restarted. Like I said, we're just gonna go over the first 250 words or so. There's not really any spoilers, at least nothing that I haven't talked about before already. Not that you can really spoil anything on the first page. So I'm gonna go sentence by sentence for the most part. There are a couple of really short sentences that I'll just roll into the next one. Like I said, for the most part, sentence by sentence. So in draft one, we open with the line, "All things considered, the West Mesa Police Department have a pretty solid case that Araceli Fonseca has accidentally or otherwise committed arson." So that's my opening line. And I think it sets the tone pretty quickly. It establishes the main character. It establishes the current situation that she has in, and kind of gives the opening snapshot some tension, which I think is necessary in any opening couple of pages. Moving over to the second draft, I tweaked it just a little bit because after doing some research, I found that you can't accidentally commit arson in New Mexico, which is where this is set. So I took out the accidentally or otherwise, and now it simply reads, "All things considered, the West Mesa Police Department has a pretty solid case that Araceli Fonseca committed arson." So I'd love to know what you guys think of that opening line. Like I said, I honestly thought when I went from draft one to draft two that I would rewrite this completely, but I ended up thinking that it's fairly effective. So I would love y'all's opinion. Moving on, back in draft one, the next paragraph starts with this sentence. "That's what the arresting officer called it anyway, as he placed the scowling, slightly drunk 24-year-old into the back of his squad car." Again, establishes the character and a little bit of how she ended up in this situation in the first place. Again, I just made some minor tweaks when I pulled this over to draft two. The draft two version reads, "That's what the arresting officer called it anyway, as he placed the protesting, slightly drunk 22-year-old into the back of his squad car." So I changed out one of the adjectives of Araceli from scowling to protesting. I just think that it makes more sense that she would be actively arguing against being arrested instead of just being dour about it. And then I aged her down, and I did that because of her situation in life. She's kind of a layabout. She's never really had a permanent job. She has been kicked out of her grandmother's home and is now just couch surfing. And I just feel like 22 makes a little bit more sense at being still at that stage in life, whereas 24 24, 25, you're getting a little bit too old for that. And it just made her feel a little bit more pathetic as a character, which in some ways is a good thing. I mean, that's why I made it her backstory in the first place. But I did think that 22 makes it just a little bit more sense for, again, being at that stage in life and still having not accomplished much. Back in draft 1, the next sentence reads, "This inauspicious event followed a perfunctory investigation that concluded Arceli had attempted to set off some illegal fireworks that promptly exploded upon ignition and set her neighbor's already half-dead tree ablaze." And this is a good example of how my writing voice really differs from what the main character's voice is. A lot of big words in there. That is definitely my style in particular, even though Arceli is a high school dropout and she has no formal education, and she's, obviously living in the modern day and probably wouldn't use most of these words herself. I don't know how to reconcile that yet, because I definitely know that that is my voice, not Arceli's voice, and I don't know, I don't really know what to do about that. I don't know how to take myself out of it and let her come into it more into the narrative style. I think as I get further along and as we are spending more time specifically in her head, it becomes more her voice. But in this moment, we're not in her head yet. I'm just describing her situation. And I think that's why it's more my voice than her voice. Again, I'm not super sure what to do about that. And maybe I'm just being hypercritical of it. And you actually do see more of my voice throughout the narration. And I'm only being super critical because we're looking at it now. But I have thought, I love this sentence. I love how descriptive it is. And I do love the language that I use. But I also think this, this is supposed to be modern day. This isn't supposed to be, anyway, and not an especially academic setting. Anyway, so that's my concern. Moving over to the draft 2 version, I did again tweak it just slightly. Actually, did I? How much did I change in this? It now reads, "This inauspicious event followed a perfunctory investigation which concluded Arceli had attempted to set off some illegal fireworks that promptly exploded upon ignition and set her neighbor's already half-dead tree ablaze." Just one little word tweak because I used that later in the sentence, and I think it just makes more sense. Again, the language works for me. I don't know that it'll work for a reader. Uh-oh. Hey, what's up?
Hello.
Okay, back in draft 1, we start a new paragraph, and this sentence reads, "To be fair, she had climbed that tree and it did burst into flames shortly thereafter. Stupid dry New Mexico summer." And I did tweak this one a bit going into draft 2 and combined it with the following sentence. So the draft 2 version reads, "To be fair, she had climbed that tree and it did burst into flames shortly thereafter." And I cut the stupid dry New Mexico summer thing because later on in the book, I talk a little bit about it being monsoon season and the storms that come through during monsoon season. And while that doesn't necessarily make it not dry, and obviously New Mexico is very dry, I just didn't like that those two things seem to be at odds with each other, and I don't really need that particular part of the sentence, so I just cut it. So back in draft 1, the sentence says, "But aside from that admittedly compelling evidence, there isn't any actual proof that Arceli ever possessed such a legal ordinance. So really, who's to say how the tree caught fire?" And in draft 2, this is pretty similar, except I added it to the end of the first sentence and made it one big long run-on sentence. "But aside from that admittedly compelling evidence," which I put in parentheses, "there isn't any actual proof that Arceli ever possessed such a legal ordinance, so really who's to say how the tree caught fire?" And now we're more into Arceli's voice, as you can tell, now that we're seeing things from her perspective rather than like a narrate, I kind of imagine the camera zooming in on the moment like you see sometimes in movies, so that those first few paragraphs were the narrator, the camera coming in, and now we're firmly in her perspective. Back in draft 1, it continues, "Not that any of that matters to the West Mesa police officers who responded to the scene," which is identical in both versions, so we're just gonna move on. "The fact that it's the 4th of July and there are a half dozen witnesses placing her in the tree at the time it went up is enough for them." In draft 2, I do tweak this sentence a little bit, and it says, "The fact that it's the 4th of July and there are a half dozen witnesses placing her in the tree at the time of its untimely conflagration is enough for them to bust out the handcuffs and a Miranda warning, as well as a complimentary ride down to the station." So I defined what actually happened. I used a little bit more of my flowery language that you're kind of saying is part and parcel. Just sort of identified what happened when she was arrested. Because you'll see back in draft 1 that I just kind of leave it at that. And so I want to just be more detailed. In draft 1, the next sentence reads, worse, she can't exactly tell them the real cause of the fire, which leaves her in a rather sticky situation. Again, in draft 2, I elaborate on this. And by saying, worse still, Arceli can't exactly tell them the real cause of the fire, as that would accomplish little more than an involuntary psych hold, not to mention completely undermine her plea of innocence, all of which leaves her in a rather sticky situation. And I wanted to elaborate on this because something I have been worried about with this opening chapter and opening scene is that I am trying to build up to the reveal at the end of the scene, which is that she has magic, and she did this with magic. And in the original version of this scene, I don't think I did it enough. I only nudged at it once or twice, and I was starting to feel a little bit like I'm not giving the reader enough to be interested. I still don't know that I am, to be honest with you, in this version, but I do get closer to it by hinting at it more. So that's kind of why I elaborated in that sentence. Almost done. We're almost to the end of this first page. The next sentence is essentially identical in both versions. It says, flash. All right, now turn to your left. That's draft 1. In draft 2, it says, flash. Very good, Miss Fonseca, now turn to your right. So just a couple of things different, not really anything particularly groundbreaking. And then this last paragraph is the only thing that really changes really dramatically from draft 1 to draft 2. In draft 1, it says, "Aw, but my right is my good side." Arceli affects a pout she's seen her best friend Lulu successfully deploy more than once in quest of ditching a speeding ticket. "See, I've got a dimple." For emphasis, she turns her right cheek towards the camera and grins. And that pretty much goes completely away. I wasn't really in love with that. I didn't really feel like the humor was very fun, good. Honestly, I don't really love the way I approached it in draft 2 either, but I got a little bit closer while being a little bit more concise. In draft 2, it says, "Why? Is there something over there you want me to see?" Arceli raises her eyebrows, barely suppressing a still tipsy giggle. Again, I don't know that I love that, but I need a way to transition from the narrative setup to in the moment of the scene. And I thought that the best way to do that would be to be in the middle of her booking process by taking a picture. I think the flash of the camera is very evocative and puts us right in the middle of the scene after those first several paragraphs of setup. I do still need to work on that transitory sentence of Arceli's, trying to showcase her personality a little bit more, which is kind of irreverent and not taking anything seriously and still not really believing that this is real kind of a situation. Like I said, I'm not in love with it, but it moved me on. And that's really what I needed it to do at that time. And that's it. That wraps up the first roughly 250 words. In the first draft, it was 249. In the second draft, it ended up being 259. Of all of those changes, I didn't actually add a great deal of words, just 9 words, and still arrived to basically the same point in the narration. So that's it. Like I said, just a quick overview of some of the changes I made. Like I said before, this isn't a great representation of how much I'm pulling over, because I did pull a lot of those 7,000 words that I mentioned earlier are in this scene. I pulled over a lot because I ended up really liking the way that I approached it. In fact, I read through the whole first chapter yesterday when I was going through some of these changes, and I don't know, I kind of like my first chapter. I don't know that it's good, but I was feeling pretty hot on myself yesterday when I was rereading it. I'd love to know what you guys think. Obviously, this is not a complete product. This is not the finished product. It definitely needs some more work. I'll be the first to say that, but I would love to know what you guys think of the voice, and if you have any suggestions to make this opening snapshot stronger. Who knows what will come in the third draft when I'm actually trying to make it good. If you follow the logic that the first draft is to make it exist, the second draft is to make it make sense, and the third draft is to make it good, I'm still just in that middle phase of making it work rather than trying to make it a readable product. That being said, I would still love feedback. So let me know what you think in the comments. I would so appreciate it. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I so appreciate it. If you like my content and want to support the channel, please like and subscribe, or consider leaving a comment down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, is there a jail emoji because she's being booked into jail? If there is, leave me a jail emoji. If not, a policeman or something like that. In my next video, I will not have a writing vlog for you because I am actually at this moment on a boat in the middle of the ocean, and I'm not writing. So what I hope to have for you next is actually a little travel vlog. Probably won't be anything too robust, but a little vacation cruise travel vlog. I hope you look forward to it, and I will see you then. Bye.